Hello, everyone. Thanks for taking time to attend today's webinar. We'll be providing an overview of key proposed changes for revision 14 of the Energy Star Single Family New Homes Program. This is Dean Gamble speaking. I'm the technical manager for the Energy Star Single Family New Homes Program. Let me run through our agenda. Briefly, I want to share our primary goals for revision 14 of the Single Family New Homes Program, and then I'll get into the heart of the presentation. An overview of 5 key proposals. The first is to eliminate the mandatory reduced thermal bridging details. The second is to streamline air sealing details and add an infiltration backstop. The third is to narrow the scope of the builder verified items. The fourth is to transition everyone to track A, HVAC and sunset track B. And the fifth one is to sunset the water management system builder requirements. These proposals are fairly fleshed out in this presentation, and so we think it's a good time to get feedback from our partners before deciding whether to proceed with these changes, and then if we do, whether any refinements are needed. And then we'll go ahead and wrap up with next steps. As you're probably aware, we release an annual revision to our program requirements. These revisions are intended to simplify, clarify, and improve the program primarily based on partner feedback. So unlike new versions, which meaningfully ramp up the stringency of the program, revisions are more of a maintenance release. It's a continuous improvement process that leverages all the great feedback we get from you. For Rev 14 of the Single Family New Homes Program, we have a few primary goals. The first is building on a theme that you've already heard us discussing quite a bit over the last year. That's to enhance the quality assurance and quality control of our program. And with this revision, we're doing that in 2 ways. First, by reducing the number of requirements that are not radar verified. And the second is by adding objective performance targets so we're more confident that every certified home meets our intent. The second major goal is to reduce program complexity, and we intend to do this by creating a more linear certification process with fewer decision points. And the third major goal, sort of related, is to simplify the program by exchanging several lower impact mandatory measures for performance-based approaches. By eliminating some of the mandatory requirements, we think we'll create fewer trip points for our partners where it becomes really difficult to proceed with certification. And by exchanging them for performance-based approaches, we think we'll still end up with homes that are meeting our brand promise. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into our first proposal, which is to eliminate the mandatory reduced thermal bridging details. Now, for each of these proposals, I'm going to start with some background for context. The program currently requires homes to meet several mandatory details that reduce thermal bridging unless the home qualifies for one or more exemptions. These are contained in Section 3 of the National Radar Field Checklist, and they encompass a few different areas: the attic edge, attic platforms, above grade walls, and slab edge insulation, as shown here. So that's the story today. These details are actually really important. They improve comfort and efficiency. As a result, they provide value for certified homes that are able to incorporate these details. However, with that said, to accommodate structural constraints, numerous exemptions have been added to the program over the years around these details. We really couldn't put raters in a position of second-guessing structural engineers, for example. So we had to be fairly deferential and write these exemptions to be fairly broad. Those exemptions have made the program a lot more complex. The original requirement that you read on a checklist, it might look pretty straightforward, but then as a partner, you need to know about all the times when the requirement doesn't even apply because of these exemptions. And because those requirements don't always apply, it's also resulted in a less consistent set of features among certified homes. So for example, one home might have insulated headers, and then a home the next community over might not have insulated headers. Beyond this, the industry standard for ratings, ANSI ResNet ICC 301, has continued to advance the bar to better capture these sorts of details in energy modeling. So what do we hope to achieve in Rev 14 in this area? Well, we want to continue to promote the use of reduced thermal bridging strategies just like today. At the same time, we want to reduce the program's complexity by making these features optional rather than mandatory. So that brings us to our proposed revision. The most significant change would be to convert Section 3 of the National Radar Field Checklist from mandatory features into a list of details that has to be assessed. Through their assessment, they can be accurately reflected in the final energy model. A related but minor change would be to move the insulation-related requirement for attic access panels, drop-down stairs, and whole house fans from Section 4, which is related to air sealing, up to Section 3 with the other reduced thermal bridging details for better clarity. And to complement this change, we would add a new item to a new section of the National Radar Design Review Checklist. That new item would recommend, but not require, that the radar review whether reduced thermal bridging features are intended to be used during construction. That would help ensure that these details are still in the mind of the radar and the builder. So what are the implications of these changes? Well, first, homes would no longer be mandated to do things like include slab edge insulation, advanced framing, etc. However, homes without such features would have to compensate with other measures to achieve the same ERI score. And that means that we would no longer need our current slab edge exemption document. In lieu of that, we provide additional guidance on how to accurately model these features or their absence in homes. The outcome of all of this might be a little bit smaller than you'd first expect. Certified homes, we think, will continue to incorporate these features wherever it's practical, and homes that were previously using exemptions never had these features in the first place. They'll continue to need to offset the ERI impact by upgrading with other features. So this is a mock-up of the revised Section 3 of the National Radar Field Checklist. It emphasizes in the heading that the strategies are not mandatory, but that these details must be accurately assessed per 301, just like any other rated home. For example, rather than saying that the attic edge has to be insulated to R21 or R30, depending on the climate zone, the rater has to pay particular attention to any variance in the R value and installation quality at the attic edge. Where a builder uses a high-density bat, for example, or a raised heel truss, that can be used to improve the ERI score and also help meet our thermal backstop. If those strategies aren't used, then you can't claim credit for them, and you'll have to compensate with other measures. So even though we don't think this will have a huge impact on how certified homes are actually built, we do think it will greatly reduce the complexity of the program. With this one proposed change, we can actually eliminate 13 footnotes for the radar field checklist, all containing guidance and exemptions around those reduced thermal bridging details. And here's a mock-up of the new Section 5 of the National Radar Design Review Checklist. This mirrors a section that already exists in the multifamily new construction program. It recommends, but doesn't require, that the radar review the reduced thermal bridging strategies called out on the radar field checklist and identify which strategies, if any, are intended to be used in the home that's pursuing certification. So it's an appropriate review at the design stage to see if you want to plan for things like high density bats, raised heel trusses, insulated attic platforms, advanced framing, etc. Like all of these proposals, we'll be asking for your feedback. We have a few specific questions teed up on this topic. Number one, do you agree that converting the mandatory reduced thermal bridging details to optional ones, while eliminating the exemptions, will result in comparable performance for most homes? Number two, will the new item added to the radar design review checklist help encourage partners to consider and plan for the use of reduced thermal bridging details? Number three, do you have any other feedback on this topic? So you don't have to answer this now. This is what you can tell us during the feedback period that will be starting tomorrow. Okay, one down, on to proposal number two. That is to streamline our mandatory air sealing details and add an infiltration backstop. Again, let me start with some background context. Certified homes are intended to be reasonably well air sealed for efficiency, comfort, and durability. Obviously, air sealing brings lots of benefits. Currently, this is accomplished through the mandatory air sealing details in Section 4 of the National Radar Field Checklist. It's comprised of 10 checklist items that predominantly cover air sealing, and it has a smattering of insulation requirements, for example, the requirement for an R10 insulated attic access panel. We think these are all very practical and achievable for builders to accomplish. And we think that mandatory details combined with a pre-drywall radar inspection is the most cost-effective way to achieve a tight home. There's never going to be a cheaper way to verify and, more importantly, fix any issues than during a pre-drywall inspection. So this approach has generally worked pretty well. So what are our goals for this revision? The first is to improve the clarity and focus of our mandatory air sealing measures, and the second is to objectively demonstrate that every certified home is reasonably tight. That's something that's missing from the single-family new homes program today, but it's actually already required in the multifamily new construction program, which has a mandatory air leakage limit. So this is a chance to better align with that program as well. So what is our proposal here? Part one is to refine but not completely overhaul the mandatory air sealing details. Similar refinements will be made to the mandatory air sealing details in the multifamily new construction program, and Rebecca will be talking more about that later today. During some preliminary outreach, raters really cautioned us not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. They felt the mandatory air sealing details are playing an important role in the program today. So we don't want to completely overhaul things, just refine things. Part two of this proposal is to add the new mandatory enclosure air leakage backstop or limit for all homes. And again, the multifamily new construction program already has such a backstop. Okay, so let's first walk through the proposed refinements to the air sealing details. First up is item 412. We want to refine the requirement regarding attic access panels, drop-down stairs, and whole house fans. First off, we want to move the R10 insulation requirement up to section 3, reduce thermal bridging, because that's not really an air sealing measure to begin with, so that should improve clarity. And second, we'll refine the wording to better align with the multifamily new construction program. So this is truly just a refinement to this item, not a major change. Next up is item 413. Here we'll eliminate the requirement to insulate the exterior surface of recessed lighting fixtures that are in cathedral ceilings in cold climates. Why are we doing that? One, it's not applicable to most certified homes. It's a pretty niche detail. Two, it's an insulation rather than an air sealing measure, so it really doesn't belong in this section. And three, it's pretty difficult for raters to verify. So that really creates some hurdles during the certification process. So what will remain is the requirement for recessed lights to be ICAT labeled and gasketed, just like today. The third refinement is to eliminate item 4.4, which is the requirement for continuous top plate or blocking at the top of walls. I had to dust off some files, but this was originally added way back in version 2 of the program a long time ago. And its purpose back then was to ensure a 6-sided air barrier for wall insulation, rather than as a whole house infiltration measure. This requirement is now addressed in ANSI ResNet ICC 301, which requires a 6-sided air barrier for fibrous, fat, and loose fill insulation if you want to achieve grade 1 or grade 2. Because it's already a requirement embedded in standard 301, and it's not really an air sealing measure per se, we're striking it as a dedicated checklist item. Next up is item 4.1.8. This is a 2-part item that requires sill plates to be sealed to the foundation or subfloor, and also that a gasket be installed beneath the sill plate if it rests on top of concrete or masonry. What we're proposing is to eliminate the requirement to include a gasket beneath the sill plate. So it still has to be air sealed, but a gasket does not have to be installed in every home for it to be certified. Okay, why are we proposing this change? 2 reasons. First, this is the only air sealing measure that we identified that's really not practical to correct if the builder misses it. Today, this really creates a certification dead end if it's overlooked by the builder. Second, it's still possible to build a tight home without this individual measure. So we can accomplish our primary objective of requiring homes to be reasonably tight, even without a gasket. Even if we do proceed with this change and remove it from the checklist, partners could still certainly include a gasket to improve air sealing and, in particular, reduce moisture migration from the foundation up into the walls. So it's still a great idea, but it simply becomes something that's above and beyond the minimum program requirements for certification. And then just to be clear, the mandatory requirement to air seal the sill plate to the floor or subfloor would remain. Next up is a refinement. Item 419 contains a requirement to seal the common wall between dwelling units and multifamily buildings. That's how it's phrased today. Now that low-rise multifamily buildings have moved over to the multifamily new construction program, and the single-family new homes program just covers detached single-family homes, townhouses, and duplexes, we think we can clarify this language, just simplify it and make it easier to understand. So now we can explicitly reference this application of this detail to townhouses and duplexes. So there's really no change in intent, just a clarification of language. And the final refinement has to do with footnotes. We're proposing to actually remove 2 air sealing exemptions related to stucco cladding. The first one we're proposing to remove is an exemption from air sealing the sill plate to the foundation or subfloor when stucco cladding is present. The other one we're proposing to remove is an exemption from air sealing rough openings around windows and doors when stucco cladding is present. So if we proceed with this proposal, then partners would need to air seal these 2 locations even when stucco cladding is present. So why this change? A couple of reasons. First, upon further reflection, stucco cladding really is not an airtight finish, so it doesn't truly serve as an equivalent to caulking or foaming these locations. Second, air sealing these details using traditional methods like caulk or foam is really a relatively inexpensive detail to implement. So we think an exemption is less warranted. And finally, removing these exemptions and requiring these air sealing details to be completed in all homes will actually simplify the program, fewer exemptions, and it should result in more consistent outcomes. Okay, so hopefully you agree those are really just refinements. Now let's move on to the other key part of this proposal. That's adding a new mandatory air leakage backstop. Homes that are meeting our mandatory air sealing measures should be reasonably tight, and an ERI rating already requires that enclosure leakage rate be measured. So there's no extra effort required to add in a backstop or limit for most homes. And by doing this, the enclosure leakage rate backstop will objectively ensure that all certified homes are meeting our intent to be reasonably airtight. It's worth noting this backstop will be the worst rate allowed in a certified home. So we'd actually expect the majority of homes to do much better than these backstop limits, and the Energy Star reference design rates would continue to be set equal or better than these limits. So let's talk some specifics. Given that this is a new requirement being introduced, we're proposing enclosure leakage limits that a large majority of single-family certified homes are already meeting today. Specifically, for all versions except National 3.2 and California version 3.4, the proposed leakage limit is 4.5 ACH50. Approximately 85% of Energy Star single-family homes with a confirmed rating met this limit in 2023. So basically, everyone's satisfying this requirement today. For National 3.2 and California version 3.4, we're proposing a slightly more stringent limit of 4.0 ACH50, which nearly 70% of Energy Star single-family homes with a confirmed rating met in 2023. We won't be proposing limits for the Caribbean or Pacific program requirements, which still leverage passive cooling techniques. Now, we know from our work on multifamily new construction that small or attached units can sometimes have difficulty meeting the same ACH50 metrics as large detached homes. For that reason, we're adding an alternative metric for dwellings that are less than or equal to 1,500 square feet of conditioned floor area, as well as for all townhouses and for attached dwelling units. For these home types, the air leakage is permitted to be less than or equal to 0.3 CFM at 50 pascals per square foot of dwelling unit enclosure area. That's the same metric and limit that the multifamily new construction program has today. Note that this new limit would only be enforced beginning with revision 14, with an anticipated implementation date of homes permitted on or after January 1st of 2026. So permit-based and still 18 months away or so. So here's a mock-up of the revised air sealing section. All of the mandatory air sealing details would now fall under section 4.1. Otherwise, it's more or less the same. And then the new enclosure leakage limit would fall under 4.2, which is new. We'll be specifically soliciting feedback on the following on this topic. Number one, do you agree with the proposed edits to streamline or eliminate certain mandatory air sealing details? Number two, are there additional opportunities that you would recommend to further streamline or eliminate the mandatory air sealing details? Number three, do you agree that the newly proposed leakage limits are achievable? And number four, do you have any other feedback on this topic? Moving right along, let's discuss the third proposal, which is narrowing the scope of the builder verified items. So first, the background information. Today, at the discretion of the rater, builders are permitted to verify up to 8 items in sections 1 through 4 of the National Rater Field Checklist. That policy has been in place for quite some time. The only recent change is that in the last revision, builder verification for item 1.2 related to insulation levels and 1.3 related to insulation grade was limited to 10% of the surface area, and that was in response to a partner question. The proposals that we have just discussed for reduced thermal bridging and air sealing will reduce the number of items that we think need to be eligible for builder verification. For example, by converting the mandatory reduced thermal bridging features to just a list of details that have to be assessed, there's no longer a need for these items to be builder verified, right? So if the rater is able to verify reduced thermal bridging strategies, then they'll be included in the rating. And if the rater can't verify those, then they'll have to be excluded from the rating. We won't be relying on the builder to verify anything for this section. So the goals for this revision are as follows. Number one, to provide clear guidance on whether each checklist item is eligible to be fully, partially, or not builder verified. And number two, to reduce the total number of items eligible for builder verification. So on to the proposed revision. We're proposing to triage the checklist items in section 1 through 4 into 3 different groups. The first category is items that should not be verified by the builder. So that could be because of the ease of rater verification. For example, verifying fenestration ratings is something that we think a rater should be able to do in every home. Or it could be because of importance. For example, it's particularly important for IAQ reasons that walls separating attached garages from occupiable space be air sealed. So we think that should always be verified by the rater, not by the builder. So that's the first category. The second category is items that may need to be partially verified by the builder at specific locations, but should not be wholly builder verified. So I mentioned the last revision driving home this point with a 10% limitation on verification of insulation levels. We understand there might be a valid reason that a builder needs to verify the R value of, say, like a small portion of an assembly because it's going to be concealed before the rater arrives, but it was never our intent, for example, for the builder to verify 100% of the insulated assemblies in lieu of the rater. So we'd like to extend that logic to other details with this revision, such as verification of sealing air barriers or some air sealing details. And then the third category is items that may need to be fully verified by the builders due to logistical issues. For example, for the requirement to seal drywall to the top plate. If the builder chooses to use adhesive between the side of the top plate and the drywall, it might be impossible for the rater to ever verify that detail themselves. And so we've assigned each of the checklist details to one of these 3 categories. In addition, we're proposing to reduce the total allotment of builder verified items from 8 down to 5 in light of our other proposals. So it's a bit of right sizing. Now, we don't need to review each item individually during today's presentation, but I wanted to include these screenshots so you can consider them more carefully during the comment period. So here's section 1 and 2. You can see that we removed the ability of builders to verify the fenestration ratings in 1.1. There are a few targeted air barrier details that were okay in concept with the builder verifying in their entirety, like the walls behind showers, tubs, staircases, and fireplaces. So that is allowed to be fully builder verified. And then the remaining items in these sections allow up to 10% of the surface area to be verified by the builder. Here's section 3, the revised section on reduced thermal bridging that you've already seen. As I explained earlier, these would no longer be eligible for builder verification Is it simply an assessment? And here's section 4, air sealing. We think most of the air sealing details can be verified by the rater, so they would not be eligible for builder verification. A few exceptions are item 4.1.1 and 4.1.5. Those are the overarching air sealing requirements and the sealing of rough openings around windows and doors, which a builder might want to verify small portions of. And then 3 details that might be hard for raters to verify: recessed lights, drywall sealed to the top plate, and sill plate sealed to the floor, where builder verification, full builder verification would still be allowed. So among these 4 sections, raters would be permitted to use builder verification on up to 5 of the eligible items. So where could we use your feedback? First, do you agree it's appropriate to classify each item as one that cannot be builder verified, one that can be partially builder verified, or one that can be fully verified? Second, do you agree that reducing the allotment of builder verified items to 5 is justified given the other proposals? Third, I want to call out one specific change. We're proposing item 4.1.2, which requires the sealing of fire-rated area separation walls. So for like townhomes and duplexes, we're proposing that not be eligible for builder verification. So is it correct to assume that raters should be able to verify this item during their inspection? And fourth, do you have any other feedback on this topic? Okay, we're breezing through this. Moving on to proposal number 4, a transition to track A, HVAC grading, and the sunset of track B. First, some context. As you're hopefully aware, the program currently has 2 compliance tracks for completing the HVAC design and commissioning requirements: track A, HVAC grading, and track B, HVAC credential. So track A is the newer of the 2 tracks. It's based on ANSI ResNet ACA ICC 310, which you've probably heard me talking about a lot over the last few years. That contains 5 key rater tasks: a design review, a total duct leakage test, a measurement of blower fan airflow and blower fan watt draw, and an assessment of refrigerant charge. Then we have track B, which has been around since the launch of version 3.0, so 14 years or so. That requires the use of a credentialed HVAC contractor who completes the verification tasks in lieu of the rater. So track A was developed using all of the lessons learned from implementing track B for so long, and we truly think that track A is the superior track. It offers several significant advantages over track B: true third-party verification by the rater versus contractor verification. A credentialed contractor is not required, which has been a challenge, particularly in smaller markets. The HVAC contractor is not required to complete the Energy Star HVAC commissioning checklist because the rater is doing the verification instead. And it rewards proper installations with ERI points. For these reasons, adoption of standard 310 is growing, or track A, and that was used in over 20,000 rated homes in 2023 alone. For the last several years, we've allowed partners to choose which track works best for them, but there's a cost to maintaining both of those tracks. It makes the program more complex and unwieldy because partners have to understand both of those tracks in order to choose their preferred one. And there are some similar but not identical requirements in the 2 tracks, which creates some confusion over these minor differences. And finally, there are multiple program documents, requirements, and footnotes specific to track B that have to be maintained. So that leads me directly into our goals for this revision, which are: number 1, to streamline the certification workflow, meaning fewer points where you have to stop and make a decision. Number 2, simplify the program by reducing Energy Star specific documents, requirements, and footnotes. And number 3, ensure that the verification of HVAC design and installation for the purpose of the program is completed by third-party raters rather than self-certified by credentialed contractors. Okay, so what's the proposed revision here? It's to sunset track B for homes that are permitted on or after January 1st of 2026, about 18 months from now. We know that a number of partners are still ramping up on track A. So for homes that are permitted on or after this date, in lieu of track B, we're proposing that tasks 1 through 3 of standard 310 be completed for a home to be certified. So let's walk through these tasks in a bit more detail. Task 1 is a design review. It's very similar to the design review that you complete today under Track B. It's just a little bit more comprehensive. So for partners new to Track A, this is going to feel really familiar, even though you'll have to get used to the new report format and the design review criteria. Task 2 is a total duct leakage test. It's literally the same test that you're already doing today for the Energy Star program, so literally no change here. That means that Task 3 is the only one that will really be new for partners who are currently using Track B. It requires the rater to measure the total airflow going through the installed HVAC system and compare it to the design airflow. To achieve grade 1 or 2, you have to have less than 25%, you have to be less than 25% off of the design value. So it's quite a generous tolerance. Then tasks 4 and 5, they provide tremendous value. They assess the watt draw of the blower fan and they assess the refrigerant charge. However, we're willing to make these recommended rather than required for the time being while the industry ramps up on tasks 1 through 3. And for partners ready to do tasks 4 and 5, they'll still be rewarded, for example, to have additional confidence that the system has been installed correctly, and they'll be rewarded with additional ERI points. So this sounds like a big change, but let's summarize the key implications for raters. If you haven't already done so, you'll have to complete any one-time training required by your HCO prior to using Standard 310. Second, you'll have to start collecting HVAC design documentation that's compliant with Standard 310, along with our Energy Star supplement. And you'll have to review it per the requirements of Standard 310 and our rater design review checklist. And really the big change will be that raters will have to begin measuring the total HVAC system airflow to ensure it's within 25% of the design airflow. For the rater design review checklist, this proposal results in some minor edits to the first page, which are shown here. The second page of the checklist, though, is completely eliminated, along with 11 of the 22 footnotes on this checklist. So that is some excellent streamlining. On the rater field checklist, section 5 is simplified to reflect that all homes will use Standard 310. In addition, the total duct leakage requirement is restated as grade 1 per Standard 310. This streamlines the language while maintaining the same overall intent. And as a result of this, this allows for the deletion of 9 footnotes in the rater field checklist. So, to recap the key benefits of this proposal, it will reduce program complexity by having all partners use the same track for HVAC design and commissioning. In fact, we won't even have to refer to it as Track A anymore because it will just be a single process for all partners. It eliminates Energy Star specific requirements in exchange for Standard 310, including the elimination of the Energy Star National HVAC Design Report, the Energy Star National HVAC Commissioning Checklist, and 20 footnotes across the rater design review and rater field checklists. And importantly, it enhances quality control by requiring rater verification of the HVAC airflow. In the future, we might consider requiring the tasks 4 and 5 also be completed, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So let me run through the specific topics we're seeking feedback on for this proposal. Number 1, do you agree it's appropriate to sunset Track B? Number 2, are there any significant benefits to maintaining Track B that we've overlooked or not considered? Number 3, does the proposed transition date of January 2026 provide sufficient time to prepare? Again, with the understanding that only task 3 will be really brand new. Number 4, do you believe that EPA should require that tasks 4 and 5 be completed in addition to tasks 1 through 3? And number 5, do you have any other feedback on this topic? All right, we're almost there. On to the 5th and final proposal, which is to sunset the water management system builder requirements. So first, the background. The water management system builder requirements are a one-page list of common sense details that improve the durability of homes. These details are one of the few sets of requirements not verified by the rater, and nearly all of these details are required by the model code. In addition, these details are also required by any home that's pursuing the Indoor Air Plus program. So that is the state of things today. Moving on to our goals, they're twofold. One is to enhance the quality control of our program by addressing items that are not rater verified. And streamline the program by focusing on the requirements that deliver the greatest impact relative to standard practices. That brings us to our proposed revision, which is to sunset the water management system builder requirements with revision 14. As you'll be hearing later this afternoon, the same sunset is being proposed with revision 5 of the multifamily new construction program. While these measures would no longer be builder requirements, we still recommend that builders complete them, knowing that a lot of builders are completing them anyway for code purposes or for their own in-house durability programs. And importantly, the Indoor Air Plus program will continue to be the solution for builders interested in advancing indoor air quality and durability beyond Energy Star. So that stepping stone will still be there, just like today. Importantly, combined with the other proposals for Rev 14 that we've been discussing, this will ensure that all program requirements for Energy Star are rater verified, with the exception of the limited allowances for builder verified items on the rater field checklist. So we think that's a really important advancement for the program. And here is the final set of questions. Number one, do you agree that it's appropriate to sunset the water management system builder requirements? Number two, are there any significant benefits to maintaining those that we've not considered? And number three, do you have any other feedback on this topic? Okay, I know that was a lot of content. Let me summarize and then discuss next steps. So today we talked about 5 key proposals for revision 14, eliminate the mandatory reduced thermal bridging details, streamline the air sealing details and add an infiltration backstop, narrow the scope of the builder verified items, transition to track A HVAC grading and sunset track B, and finally sunset the water management system builder requirements. These won't be the only changes in Rev 14, but they're the most significant ones, and that's why we think they warrant stakeholder feedback before we proceed. To get that feedback, we'll be conducting a 4-week stakeholder comment period commencing tomorrow, July 18th, running through Thursday, August 15th. Starting tomorrow, you'll be able to visit the stakeholder feedback webpage for a copy of these slides, a recording of this presentation, and a stakeholder feedback form. We ask you to please submit written comments using the stakeholder feedback form to Energy Star Homes at energystar.gov. And we'll publish the outcome of these proposals this fall, and then any changes will be reflected in the program documents with the release of revision 14 later this fall or winter. Okay, thanks everyone. That's what we have for you today. Let's go ahead and open it up to questions.
Hey, Dean. Yes, so we've gotten lots of questions coming in. I've answered some of the partners already, but I'll give you a few. So we had a partner ask if Energy Star had a mandatory air tightness backstop in past revisions, and if there has been a change that went away from this.
Yeah, that's a common misconception. So I think a lot of partners assume that we've always had a maximum infiltration rate that homes have to meet in order to be certified. But in the single family new homes program, that's not been true. That's why we're proposing to add one for the first time. And per the proposal, it's a relatively lenient one that gets a little bit more stringent with national version 3.2 and California version 3.4. So we think we're kind of correcting an oversight maybe that we should have addressed earlier. And then just to emphasize, the multifamily new construction program does have a backstop already in place. So we're also syncing up the two programs in that sense.
Great, thank you, Dean. I believe we have another question in reference to the air sealing details and builder verified requirements. And the question was, how do you measure the limit of up to 10% for those?
So most of them are 10% of the surface area. So for like the insulation and air barriers, that would be the applicable metric. For the air sealing measures, it's based on the linear footage. So if you think of like the windows being air sealed, you around the rough openings, it'd be 10% of that linear surface area. Kind of would equate in a typical house to like one window could be verified by the builder and the rest would be verified by the rater. So again, it's just trying to emphasize in particular that it would be targeted applications of builder verification for these items, where that 10% factor is applied, as opposed to just a gross allowance to verify the entirety of the item by the builder.
Great, thank you. We had another question about the logistics of completing checklists. And so when something is indicated as must correct on a checklist, logistically, does the rater have to return to the site to re-verify the item, or can documentation or pictures be provided by the builder?
Generally speaking, the rater would have to return as a default. If you wanted to use one of your builder verified options, if it's an eligible item for builder verification, then that might be an opportunity to have the builder verify the correction, document it, and send you a copy of that documentation. So there would be some flexibility, I think, to use those builder verified items in that manner. The important thing to emphasize is that, it's really the rater's discretion. At the end of the day, if there is an issue with verification, it falls back on the rater. So the rater has to be fairly confident that the builder understands the requirement, is able to successfully mitigate the issue that was identified, and to document it so the rater is confident that it's actually been corrected. So I wouldn't kind of say it's a free-for-all, but it could be used in a targeted way.
Thank you. We had a couple questions regarding mini splits and track A or HVAC grading.
Okay.
And so the question is, will mini splits be able to easily comply with the track A HVAC grading requirements? So maybe we could just discuss some of the areas that are exempt in 310.
Yeah, it has less to do with the fact that it's a mini split and more to do with the fact that it's a ductless system. So within standard 310, you're always required to do the design review. So, you need to do your load calculations, even if it's a mini split, and make sure that they're accurate. So you're always doing task 1. The second task is total duct leakage. That would be exempted if you have basically a ductless system or a system with less than 10 feet of ductwork. So you'd automatically achieve grade 1 for that without any testing. And then task 3, the airflow assessment, that would also automatically achieve grade 1 if you have a ductless system or no more than 10 feet of ducts. So for mini splits, it would really be the design review that you'd be focusing on. Just to kind of complete that answer, if you continue on with the rest of the standard, you would also receive grade 1 for the watt draw measurement. So that would be an easy way to pick up points without doing any measurements. And task 5, the assessment of refrigerant charge, you would have to do even if you're a ductless mini split. Just like any other system, you want to make sure that the proper amount of refrigerant is installed. And so you can't get a free pass on that. You have to assess it in order to demonstrate that you're grade 1. But for our proposal, we're just focused on tasks 1 through 3. So really the difference for that case would be doing the design review in task 1.
All right, thanks, Dean. You kind of answered another question, but one question that came in was between now and the potential implementation of a new revision with any of these proposed changes. Will partners need to do the tasks 4 and 5 of 310?
Yeah, well, so just to be clear, nothing has changed yet because these are just proposals for now. If we finalize these proposals with revision 14, we'll provide guidance on whether any of them can be used in advance. Like, let's say we publish revision 14 in November of this year. We say you don't have to start using revision 14 until January 2026. We'll provide better guidance on whether you can use any or all of those elements from Rev 14 in advance of January 2026. So generally speaking, our policy has been to allow partners to use these revisions as soon as they're available. We'll probably be more explicit about that with Rev 14, so there's no ambiguity. So great question.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And we did have a question about if you can use a revision prior to its mandatory implementation, and you just answered that, so So yes,
Yeah.
we've generally allowed that. And related to that, could you expand on any thoughts on what a potential timeline of these proposed changes would be? Maybe talking through the kind of timeline for the comment period and revision adoption. And then related to that, would they also by default be adopted by the next gen program?
Okay, great questions. So we're kicking off the 4-week comment periods that will conclude in mid-August. It really will be driven in part by how many comments we receive. If we, it'll probably take us, honestly, a month or two to probably process and respond to all the comments. So we're thinking the fall, like September, October kind of time frame, we'd be able to probably conclude the evaluation of these proposals, unless we get so much feedback suggesting like refinements are needed. Maybe some people say this isn't going to work, but if you change it this way, it might work. If we have to do a second comment period to solicit additional feedback, that would obviously take longer than if we didn't receive any comments. So it's a little bit of a moving target, but generally it'd be sort of the September, October timeframe we'd aim to wrap up this process, and then we turn around and release the revision 14 program documents this fall or winter as well. So probably then October, November timeframe, we'd aim to release revision 14. So those would be final policies out, available for use, and then the implementation date of revision 14 would be no later than homes permitted January 1st of 2026. So for the prior question, you'd be able to start using Rev 14 as soon as it's released, but you'd have to start using it for homes permitted after January 1st of 2026. So about a year transition. And then finally, all of those improvements that we make to the core program would be inherited by Energy Star Next Gen as a general rule. I just want to call out that in some cases we set more stringent requirements in Next Gen. For example, today we already require that you get grade 1 across the board for HVAC grading. I don't think we would propose to change that, or we're not going to water down Next Gen because we're ramping up the core program. So I think we'd maintain the requirement for grade 1 across the board in Next Gen. That's probably why that partner was asking that particular question. So that's an astute observation. We wouldn't plan to change that particular requirement for Next Gen.
Great, thanks, Dean. Someone asked for clarification that with the proposal, a blower door test will be required for all versions, including in California, asking if that was accurate.
Correct, that's correct. Yeah, and I know that, somewhat unintuitively, the California code doesn't require infiltration testing for every house unless you are claiming a credit for infiltration below like the default levels in code. What we've heard is that most partners pursuing Energy Star in the state are in fact claiming credit for going below the default infiltration in the California code. So they're doing the blower door test already today. And regardless, we think it's an important assessment, again, for any home to objectively demonstrate that they're tight. So we feel like it's a good proposal applicable to all states, including California.
Thanks, Dean. We had another partner ask if there is a standardized way to account for advanced framing in energy models. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, so ANSI ResNet ICC 301, the 2022 edition, which was obviously published a few years ago, and ResNet is working on defining the implementation date for that new standard. They're in the midst of proposing a next year for that. That has reworked the definition of advanced framing, and it generally aligns with the key details that we have been promoting all along with Energy Star, like insulated headers, insulated corners, and I think it's the limitation of framing around windows and doors. So if you go into Standard 301 2022, you see a much more comprehensive and detailed definition of advanced framing. If you meet all those details, then you can claim a reduced framing fraction compared to the 25% framing fraction default. So that's one of the enhancements that I was kind of alluding to in the slides, and we think that helps justify our move to represent things in modeling rather than as mandatory measures.
Thanks, Dean. We had a partner ask about the proposed changes for slab edge insulation, and they ask if you could just clarify and maybe re-explain what the proposal is for that. And they noted that the inclusion of slab edge insulation can have a big change on the ERI target. So maybe just talk about what's changing in the mandatory requirements and in the reference design or the ERI targets.
Yeah, so nothing is changing in the reference design. So the homes in the reference design are configured with insulation with, I think the only exception is around, to double check my logic on it, is around termites, but not around exemptions related to like monolithic slabs or whatever. So that's going to remain the same. So if you decide to omit insulation, then you'll have to compensate with other measures to hit the ERI target that you would have had to hit otherwise, and the thermal enclosure. And so, most often, in a lot of cases, the exemptions that we were getting requests for single family homes were for particular details. Like I can't insulate where I'm pouring an integrated stoop for the front porch. And so I can have like 10 feet that's not insulated and the rest of it will be insulated. We'd have to write up an exemption specifically for that detail because it wasn't 100% insulated. So now instead you'd be modeling that a small portion is not insulated, the rest is insulated, and you'd have to compensate with other measures to meet the thermal backstop and meet the ERI target. And then if you really, then it becomes a question if you can't, let's say there's some condition where you can't insulate any of the slab and it has a huge impact on the ERI, and you can't come up with other measures to compensate, then that's an indication that may not be a home that's suitable for certification. If you're omitting something that you were allowed to omit in the past, and now you're not getting a free pass, you actually have to compensate for it, and you can't compensate for it, then that's an indication that, again, it might not be suitable for certification.
Great, thanks, Dean. So the remaining questions we have gotten in, I think are pretty specific, and we can follow up with partners directly, or you can email the program to ask us. And so, yeah, great questions. I think that's all the ones we have for now. Great.
And before we wrap up, I'll just do a quick shout out for the webinar that's happening about an hour from now at 3 o'clock East Coast time. Rebecca Hudson will be presenting on the parallel proposals for the multifamily new construction program. They largely build on top of the single family proposals, but then they go further due to some of the unique features in that program. So I encourage you to tune in after an hour break and hear the rest of the story. And thanks again for taking time today. We really appreciate you tuning in, and we look forward to your feedback over the next 4 weeks. Take care, everyone.